Well, hello and good evening, good morning, good afternoon, whenever you're watching this. Welcome to the next episode, installment, whatever you want to call it, of Choose Your Character. Yes, that's right. It's the interview series where I interview members of the Norwalk Gamer Symphony Orchestra and pretend like I'm a professional game show host, apparently.
It's all in
Uh,
your conviction, Mike.
yeah, you just gotta have confidence, Ben. As you may have heard, my guest tonight is Ben. Ben is Ben. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself? Let's just launch right into it.
Okay. Well, I joined the orchestra and they needed a bass player, so I started playing bass more. But more traditionally a guitar player for
Gotcha,
about
gotcha.
17 years.
So you play guitar, you play bass. Do you play any other instruments?
I write for other instruments, but I do not necessarily. I wouldn't consider myself a player of any other instrument,
Gotcha,
but I
gotcha.
do. I do dabble in keyboard a little bit for writing purposes.
Yeah, we've been talking for about 15 minutes now before we
Oh,
started, and I only just now noticed that keyboard, so I am
yeah.
observant. Uh, but yeah, you've been playing bass. How long have you been playing bass with the NGSO?
Since I started with them, right off the bat, I originally was interested in playing guitar with them, but at the time they didn't need a guitar player. And oddly enough, they already had a member on bass guitar when I joined, but I joined anyway, playing bass instead of guitar.
Yeah, I
But it's
don't
good.
think I don't think
I
we'd
like
ever
it that
turn
way.
anyone down, even if they were doubling or tripling an instrument.
I actually kind of prefer playing bass in the group because it gives me an opportunity to kind of like work on my bass chops instead, which
Yeah,
I don't play as often outside of the orchestra.
yeah. I mean, that's kind of part of our stated goal as the NGSO is to help people get better at their instruments. I know that's what I that's what I do in
Yeah.
the orchestra. Um, so all right, let's talk a little bit. Let's back up and talk a little bit about your gamer tag. So I have below you what you put in our agenda here. What is your gamer tag, and where did it come from?
Okay, so my gamer tag is Mecha Jabo, and it used to be shorter. It used to just be Jabo. But so that was back from when Halo Combat Evolved came out for Xbox in 2001. So I was at my best friend's house, and he had just gotten the game, and we were both too excited to actually like start playing. So we didn't make our custom characters or anything like that. So we just did the default control scheme, and it has like auto name generation. So our names respectively were Jabo and Stompy. So that
Stumpy.
so that became the dynamic duo for a while. And then I used that gamer tag Jabo for a very long time. And then later, when emulation became like really prominent, um, you know, in the gaming community, I did some research, and the tag Jabo was also the name of the head of Project 64, which is
Hmm.
like the first Nintendo 64 emulator. So I didn't want to step on any toes at that point. So I just added Mecha, which was, you know, it's just, I'm a very big fan of mecha anime. And
Right.
that
I
kind of
think we
just
talked a
tied
little
in.
bit about that.
Yeah, I'm a very big Gundam fan. So that's kind of where it came from.
Gotcha. So this other Jabo, do you think they also got their name from Halo Combat Evolved?
I have no idea. It's very close to Jumbo, which is
Hmm.
Swahili for hello,
That's
but
fair.
I doubt that there's any parallels.
Well,
it's
you never
it's
know.
just speculation.
Super cool.
Yes, I do
Yeah.
have a cat.
Hello,
I do
cat.
have a cat.
I didn't. I'm not getting paid to interview a third guest, so I will ask no questions of the cat. But I will say hello, cat.
Yes, this is Dr. Alan Grant. He is the only person in my family with a PhD.
What's the PhD in? No, I said I wasn't going to ask any questions about the cat. Never mind. No, we're not interviewing your
No
cat.
problem.
That's for the after show. Uh, so Halo Combat Evolved back in 2001. I didn't own an Xbox, but I played it at a friend's house, and then I think I eventually got it for PC. But
Mm.
I think by the time I actually played it on PC, the multiplayer servers were long gone or were just laggy messes. So I never had
Yeah,
any.
it was pretty terrible. Because I did come from a background as a packet pupper in the chat would attest. I have a very long history of FPS gaming.
Mm,
So Halo was kind of interesting to me because it was the first FPS that I really was into that was not on PC.
Mm.
and we played quite a bit. We had several friends that really were into it at the time, so we used to do the local networking and set up multiple TVs in a house with like very long Ethernet cable, and we would just have like Halo days over the
Amazing.
summer where we'd just all be in the same house and like 16 people just like rotating in and out.
Yeah. One of my favorite video game memories from college is setting up 3 TVs and getting 12 people playing Halo 2. And we did like 3 teams of 4. I think we did capture the flag. And so everyone had a TV was on a team.
Mm.
That was a ton of fun.
Yeah,
Apparently, you have a
I
history in Unreal Tournament.
yes. So I've been playing Unreal since Unreal Classic came out, and there was a point where when I was a 16-year-old who had way too much free time on his hands, I got very good into double-digit ranking in Unreal Tournament 2003.
Gotcha.
Basically, to the point where I could win capture the flag game by myself.
Against a team
Yeah,
of
against a
however many.
team of 8 people. Yeah,
Wow. Well, I don't think I can
not
compete on
anymore.
that level. Not anymore.
As you can tell from playing Apex with me, I'm not quite at that
Gosh,
level anymore.
it's been a while since we played Apex. I haven't thought about Apex in a long time.
That's right. Well,
But speaking of Apex and Unreal Tournament and Halo, what are some of your other favorite video games? Now, as I've mentioned every time, this is not some top 5 list. This is not your most favorite video games. This is just some of your favorite video games. So
yeah.
Ben, what are some of your favorite video games?
All right. Well, I have quite a laundry list of games, but I'll keep it kind of on the briefer side. So the
I
first
mean,
game
this is your time. You want to talk about these games? You talk about these games.
all right then. Well, well, anyway, the first game that I ever played that I really fell in love with for a multitude of reasons was Sonic the Hedgehog.
Hmm.
So, back in would have been 1993. My father had come home and he bought a Sega Genesis, and it was bundled with 2 games. So one was Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, which is a terrible game, and and actually technically I think impossible to beat
Oh,
because of a
good.
glitch
Oh,
that
good.
exists in one of the levels.
I'm
But
sure
then it
they'll
also
patch it
came
one of
with
these days.
yeah, right. That's the beauty of the modern day. But anyway, yeah, Sonic the Hedgehog 2 also came with it, and that I played so many times I would not be able to tell you. It's basically a burned image into my brain with
Mhm.
every bit of area map and
The kind of thing where
anything.
you could not play it for 10 years, pick it up, and still be able to just rush through it.
Right. And what was always interesting to me about the Sonic games was like how into the music I was. I had a lot of friends who also played games like that, but they would have the music off so they could talk to people, or they would,
Hmm.
be listening to it like on the radio or something like that while they're playing. And I always felt the music was such an integral part of the game, the feel that, they were trying to go for. It really kind of like, tied like what the backgrounds were together, just like it made it a cohesive experience rather than just like there would be 2 separate things playing at the same time.
Yeah. Uh, I mean, that's it's kind of what the NGSO is all about, right? Emphasizing
Yeah, right.
the music in video games. I remember, I remember specifically for me, it was playing Heroes of Might and Magic 3. For
Mm.
whatever reason, even though I loved the music in that game and still to this day love the music in that game, I would mute it and just listen to like whatever my music was. And it was a
Yeah, I
mistake.
can see that with some games. There were definitely games that have come out that even that I've played where the music is not as inspiring, but
Mhm.
that does not apply for any of the Genesis Sonics.
Yeah.
And actually, even the modern Sonics, even though there's a lot of complaints about like gameplay or the quality of the game as a whole, with the exception of Sonic Mania, uh, I think all the music has been pretty consistently good
Hmm.
in Sonic games. It always has
Even
like some.
even Escape from the City.
Well, listen, when Sonic Sonic Adventure 2 originally came out as the demo, it was instrumental version of Escape from the City
Ooh,
on the demo, and then it had the vocal version later on when the full release came out.
gotcha. I mean, heck, I mentioned that, but I think that song is cheesy, but I also think cheesy is not a bad thing. So
No,
I
I
think
mean,
that sounds fine.
you're also a hobbit-sized hedgehog running at the speed of sound, and he does have places to go, and he is following a rainbow.
It's really just very accurate, and you can't really disagree with that.
Yeah, I do. I love the Sonic Adventure soundtrack, the first one and the second one. It's very, my background in music is very heavily into like heavy metal and
Mhm.
and rock and roll and stuff like that. So that kind of like guitar based music is really interesting to me.
Yeah. Uh, so how about some of these other games on this short list you had? We talked about Sonic. What else is on here?
Okay, the next like series that like I really got into later on was like Final Fantasy. I know that's like kind of the
Like an
cliche
is
of,
that like an indie series? I haven't
yeah,
really.
not too many people know about it. You
Mm,
probably have never heard of it. But yeah, the first Final Fantasy game I played was I was in sixth grade, and on a whim, I just saw the cover of Final Fantasy VIII, and I just thought it looked cool. The back artwork was interesting. They had some of the summons that are in the game, and I said, "Oh, that looks pretty cool." And I had never up to that point really played any, like role playing games or anything like that. So it was my first experience with it, and I just really thought it was so cool because it was something that you could really take the time and enjoy. The battle systems are not like real time. They had like
mhm.
the active battle bar and everything in that game, but for the most part, it was like a little more leisurely, but it had the same kind of like strategy, that like a game, like StarCraft might have, where you're actually taking a tactical approach on how you're fighting your opponents, but a little more leisurely.
Mhm.
And obviously, the music in that game is fantastic.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've played some Nobu Uematsu on earlier episodes of this show or podcast or whatever I'm deciding to call it. Um, fantastic music, really
Yeah,
good.
I
So
purposely stayed away from it for the sake of not oversaturating
you
it.
got to do the deeper
As much as
cuts.
I love his, yeah, right. As much as I love his music, but yeah, Final Fantasy VIII was like my introduction, and it's a game that I'll still go back and play just for nostalgia purposes. But for the most part, I can take off the rose tinted glasses of nostalgia
Mm,
and recognize that it's not the best Final Fantasy game, and even Final Fantasy VII, which is kind of like the crowd favorite, it's still a little bit lower on the list for me. It's a good game, but
mhm.
I much prefer a game like Final Fantasy IX and Final Fantasy VI are my two favorite.
So we've mentioned 6, 7, 8, and 9. Have you played any of the others in the franchise?
I played the original. I'm halfway through Final Fantasy II. I've played Final Fantasy Tactics and Final Fantasy X.
Okay.
But some of the middle ones for Super Nintendo, I haven't. I like just have started games, but never had gone back. And then basically everything after Final Fantasy X, I haven't played except for Final
Gotcha.
Fantasy VII remake.
How did you like the 7 remake? I haven't played it yet.
I thought it was good. You have to kind of isolate it and don't think about Final Fantasy VII original.
Mm,
Treat it as its own game and let it be what it is, and it does that very well. But if you're comparing everything, every little bit of how the game is structured, like what your characters are like, it is significantly different. But in and of itself a good game.
yeah. I think not to go off too far on a rabbit hole tangent because I will get started on a massive rant about remakes. But the short version is I think what you're describing is the kind of remake I prefer. Where
Mm,
like it stands as its own game and that sort of justifies the cost, right? Like this was a $60 game, right? For
right.
part one. Not to say that it was not worth it. It's apparently like a 30-hour game, but if it's just a skin upgrade over the original game, I don't see why that's worth $60. So
No,
I like
I,
when
I
they
agree.
justify it.
I completely agree with that. It's just tough because the same with like let's say a band that somebody really likes, if they come out with an album that kind of is divergent to the material that you really enjoyed when you got into the band. It's tough to kind of please everybody. So there's obviously going to be people in one camp or the other when it comes to a game like Final Fantasy VII because it is such a high notoriety game.
Gotcha. All right.
And then yeah, so I won't talk too much about it this next one just because it's a pretty popular game, but it is well deserving of the popularity.
Hmm.
So Chrono Trigger was another game that I absolutely loved. I had a handful of friends that were also very into RPGs, and I had a friend on one of my soccer teams growing up. I was over at his house one time, and he had introduced me to Chrono Trigger, and it was so funny because he was so passionate about explaining it. And at that time, I had friends that casually played video games, and I didn't have anybody who was so interested in explaining it like it was, like
Mhm.
he just dug up, like a gold coin in his backyard or something. And he was so excited about it, and it always kind of stuck with me. And I had since, got the game and played it for myself, and it's incredible. It's well deserving of all the praise, and that's probably up in my top 3 or 4
Yeah, I
RPGs.
remember playing it for the first time. I guess it must be 2 or 3 years ago at this point, and it just instantly soared to maybe my favorite JRPG of that style. Um,
Yeah, it
I
just has really great everything. Like the art style is really cool. Obviously it was, the art style was from Akira Toriyama,
yeah, I mean
who
it's Dragon
famous
Ball
for the
Z.
Dragon Ball.
Yeah.
Yeah, right, exactly. So you're kind of already familiar with the character style. The directing of the game was really cool. The story is amazing,
And
and the
obviously the
gameplay is.
music is there's
The
not a bad
music is
track.
like pretty much second to none. That is like I can go listen to that any day,
Hmm.
and it's really so, like interesting to still like this many years after the game has come out that there's still people actively rearranging and remixing and reimagining in any number of styles you could think of the music from that game, and so many people do a great job with it.
Hmm.
It's like a breath of fresh air. And then
And
and
it's
the sequel Chrono Cross is
yeah.
also up there for me.
So I actually haven't played Chrono Cross. I don't know too much about it, other than that it is a sequel, and I understand that it's actually a sequel, but apparently a lot of people play it and they're like, I don't understand how this relates to
It's
Chrono
yeah,
Trigger.
it's oh yeah, that's like a common kind of misconception. It's not actually so much a sequel. It's actually a remake of a separate game altogether that
Hmm.
they tied in. So there was a game, Radical Dreamers, which came out, which is a text-based story, and it was like not many people played it because at the time that it came out, it was actually on one of like Japan's kind of satellite gaming services where you download it onto
Okay.
physical cartridge, similar to there was a Zelda game that came out kind
There
of
were a couple
similarly.
Zelda games that came out.
Yeah, so it was similar to that. So not a lot of people, outside of Japan or even inside Japan, played it because it wasn't widely available. But the story elements of the game were really, really well done, and it was a really cool story. So the people at Square wanted to kind of like not throw it away, but make it available to a wider audience. So they started kind of looking at the characters, looking at the major plot points of the story, and fleshed out into Chrono Cross. And then later was tied in. So it was not so much a sequel, but it's somewhat happening in parallel
Hmm.
with Chrono Trigger. There are
Okay.
events that kind of coincide with each other.
Okay. And yeah, I all I know is I've heard Luca is somehow the bridge between them, but I know nothing. I know nothing.
Well, yeah, definitely pick it up, give it a shot. It's it can be anywhere from a 40 to a, depending on how much of a completionist you are, it can be probably like 120 hours.
That it really depends on the game.
It
Uh,
requires multiple playthroughs to get every single
yeah,
character in that. I think there's 54, 56 characters or something like that.
that's that's a lot
And
of
you'll never use
characters.
most of them. You'll
That's a
never
lot
use
of
most.
characters, Ben.
Most of them are not very good. There's like 6 really amazing characters in that game.
Gotcha. All right, well, kind of
Uh,
keeping on the JRPG theme here. What's next on
Yeah,
this
that's
list?
very much my thing. Despite my competitive like first person shooting, I'm very into RPGs. Um, but yeah, the Breath of Fire series is, in my opinion, like one of the most underrated and kind of hidden gems in the JRPG world. Um, the first two came out for Super Nintendo, and then 3 and 4 came out on PlayStation 1. And PlayStation 2 had Dragon Quarter, which I don't count as a Breath of Fire game. Breath of Fire Dragon Quarter, but it is kind of widely shunned by the fan base
Hmm.
for pretty good reasons. It's just not anything to do with any of the other games in the series. But anyway, but the other Breath of Fire games are all great.
So
They're
one,
very
two,
original
three,
and
and
they're kept.
four are good, and that's all there is. There's no more.
Yes, that's all you
Gotcha.
need.
Gotcha.
And they draw inspiration from a number of different kind of mythologies and backgrounds.
Okay.
Um, the It's a Capcom game. The music is all incredible in it. The characters are really interesting, and it's one of the games that has in every one a silent protagonist.
Hmm.
So you do not express any dialogue throughout the entire thing. You're just basically observing.
How very traditional video game.
Mm.
Um, well, cool. Yeah, I have barely any exposure to Breath of Fire. Yet another streamer friend of mine was playing through the series for a while, and then got burned out on streaming, and that was like 4 years ago. So I
Yeah,
haven't
if I
seen
were to
much more of that.
recommend a starting point, start with 4 because it's a very good game, and then go to Breath of Fire 3 because it is one of the best games. Probably like number 2 or 3 of all time games for me.
And then after I do four and then three, do I do two or do I do one after that? Is it-
You do 2 and 1 in whatever order you choose,
I see.
unless you want to start from worst to best. And
Hmm.
not that 1 and 2 are bad, but
Right.
they suffer kind of the same downfalls of some of the early Final Fantasy games for Nintendo and Super Nintendo, in that you have limited memory to work with, and sometimes like to cram so much information into a small platform without much like visual detail,
Hmm.
you kind of lose a lot of like context. Some of the translations are not very clear, and there was a point in when I was playing Final or playing Breath of Fire 2 that I just had took a break for a very long time, like maybe like 3 or 4 months.
Hmm.
I was like working in some school stuff in college, and I decided to get back to it in the summer. And I had no idea where I was or what I was supposed to be doing within the story. And there's no contextual clues. You can't talk to anybody who it's like, oh yeah, remember you have to go here, which they did fix in later games. There was always somebody to kind of tell you where to go from like
Hmm.
Final Fantasy 7 and up, basically.
Gotcha.
And then
Um.
I think this last one, I know that it's kind of a favorite for you,
Yeah,
so,
it's
especially the
definitely
recent
up there.
ones.
Hmm.
So Doom, I've been playing for a very long time since the original one came out on Windows 3.1. So I played it right after Wolfenstein 3D, and I was kind of hooked. It was
Gotcha.
just such an awesome game. It captured everything about just being like what it was supposed to be. It didn't try to tell a deeper story. It didn't try to go be more than it was. It was just plain and simple, a run and gun. That's all you're there for, and it was fun.
It's
It's
very
still
much
fun.
like here's a shotgun. You know what to do.
Yeah, exactly. You didn't need a manual or a guide or anything. You're just you're a marine who has one job to do,
Yep.
and that's
Uh,
to save money.
what's funny is that there is a manual and there is like story to those early games, but they're very not necessary.
No, no, it's you don't suffer any loss from not opening them up and reading them.
Yeah.
And then of course more recently Doom 2016 had come out, and Doom Eternal, which I know you and I have played pretty extensively, and those are fantastic, reimaginings and sequels to
Hmm.
that series. It
And
kind of
great soundtracks.
oh yeah, Mick Gordon is a monster, and actually he just I believe got hired to do the soundtrack, or at least contribute to the soundtrack for Atomic Hearts,
Okay.
which is a new FPS that's coming out.
Well, I will have to be on the lookout for that because I mean, his soundtrack alone is a good reason to get a game.
Yeah, he really knows how to kind of immerse you into whatever setting, whether it's like kind of that creepy ambient. He has like the kind of like synthy tracks, and but then also knows how to really turn it up, doing
Hmm.
the traditional 8 string guitar kind of chugs. And
8 strings, but you'll only use the first two.
yeah, pretty much. All you need is that 5 chord. But he does it very well. He really
Mhm.
brings you into what you're going through as the Doomslayer, and
Yeah,
it's very much appreciated. It made that game like so much better having that soundtrack.
and just the technical way they implement the soundtrack in the games is, Mick Gordon's composition is great, but then also The way it seamlessly moves back and forth between sort of the lower energy ambient stuff into the super high energy, thumping,
Mm.
beating metal as you like get into a fight. Um,
Yeah, I love games that do that. There's some that I'll talk about later. I actually have kind of queued up specifically for that reason, is that
mm,
that transitional style of music based on the scene is really cool. I think that's like a small subtlety in a game that can make a really big difference in just
yeah,
how it's perceived.
I think
Maybe
it's
not to
hard to
everybody,
do.
but at least for me, yes, to accurately do it is very difficult, because even just like making an old like a chip tune or something like that where it loops is already potentially hard enough to find like a good cohesive spot to make a complete loop that doesn't either seem too short or too long is difficult enough. So I can't imagine blending two very different styles of music seamlessly together.
All right. Well, talking about music, why don't we move on to sort of the meat or the main portion of our show? I lose confidence every time I say show. Let's move on to the
It's a
main
show.
portion of the interview tonight. Let's
Okay.
talk about some of your favorite pieces of video game music. You have queued up 5 different pieces of music from
Yes.
5 different games and 5 different composers. What do you
Mhm.
have for us first?
Okay. So this actually, even though it's the oldest game on this list, it is one of the later entries that I've actually listened to and had played the game later in life. So the first one is going to be the title track from the game Solstice for the original Nintendo. So that was a 3D isometric puzzle game. It was pretty advanced for what the Nintendo could do as far as from a technical standpoint. So it had a similar to like the viewpoint of the game Qbert for
Okay.
arcade and for Atari, and you're controlling a wizard who is going after pieces of a staff and like little treasures throughout this castle and dungeon to save a princess. So a very rudimentary story for the game, but it was interesting. It was very
Mhm.
graphically advanced for the Nintendo. And even though the soundtrack is relatively short, I think it still clocks in around like 16 minutes
Mhm.
for a non-looping, original Nintendo game. It's pretty long.
Yeah, I mean
But
that's
Tim,
a pretty standard length for NES soundtracks from
yeah,
what I've seen.
yeah, and so Tim Follin did the soundtrack for that game, and he is kind of legendary in the 8-bit arena. He did games like Silver Surfer and Solstice.
Yeah.
Uh, and what really kind of gravitated me towards this particular soundtrack is, as I had mentioned, my kind of background in music is more into like metal and rock and roll, and particularly progressive rock. So to me, this soundtrack is if you had the guys from Rush go write a video game soundtrack, this is kind of like what would happen. So
All
that it
right.
really resonated with me because of that.
Gotcha. Well, as we mentioned, this is the title screen from the game Solstice, and this was composed by Tim Follin. Here we go. turn it down and talk about it. So I hadn't listened to more than 5 seconds of this just when I was setting stuff up tonight. Uh, you talked about how this is like if a progressive rock band wrote NES music, and I knew, I knew sort of detachedly that yeah, that's how Tim Fallon writes. And then we listened to it, and I was like, yeah, that's a prog rock song. That's super cool. Once again, I mean, you guys can see it on the screen. This is the title screen to Solstice, composed by Tim Fallon. Tim Fallon, absolutely legendary. I mean, legendary enough that I know his name. And I don't know that many composers. And well deserved. I mean, you got. If anyone's watching this or listening to this right now, and you haven't checked out basically all of Tim Fallon's NES soundtracks or any of his soundtracks to any other system, go check him out, because and it doesn't even matter what game he's working on. Literally, he wrote the soundtrack to Pictionary. And you might think like,
oh, it's awesome.
it's just Pictionary, right? Like, it's just people drawing pictures. And he's like, no, I think I'm going to crank this up to 11. I think I'm just going to go wild on Pictionary. And he does, and it's fantastic.
But yeah, he definitely kind of captures that vibe with the limited sonic palette of 8-bit perfectly. I don't think there's any room that you could do more with that. And it's a perfect composition to me.
Yeah, I remember he was interviewed by one of the video game music podcasts I listen to. One of my fellow video game music podcasts. And he talked about how, his goal wasn't necessarily to make good music, although he certainly wanted to make good music, and he did. His goal was just like, what can I do with this hardware? What can I do with these sound chips? What kind of interesting things can I make? And it always turned out excellent. And like, that's progressive. That's prog. He was writing prog video game music.
For sure.
So Tim Fallon is super cool.
I believe there were similar, parallels to that kind of statement with a lot of the kind of early games that came out with new systems. You had composers that were working within the restraints of hardware, and people who really took the time to deep dive into like the actual hardware itself rather than the compositional style, but really play to the power of the system. Kind of end up with the most memorable soundtracks. Very similarly, like a game like Donkey Kong Country really took advantage of the Super Nintendo sound chip, where other games might sound a little flat. That game had so much life to it, particularly because of how well the engine was utilized. And I think in Solstice, it was kind of the same story. Somebody who really understood the hardware to a really intimate level and was able to come out with something that, if I saw a band play like this, my jaw would be on the floor.
Yeah. I mean, when are we going to cover this?
Oh, I don't know. Give me 3 years.
All right.
For one instrument.
All right. Okay, Google, set a reminder, 3 years. I'm holding you to it.
Okay. I'll play the claps.
Yeah. Okay, while you get started on that arrangement, why don't we move on to our next piece of video game music? What do you have for us next?
Okay, so as I mentioned earlier, one of my first favorite games was Sonic the Hedgehog. So Sonic the Hedgehog 2 was the first one I had played. Then went back to Sonic 1. And then I remember I pretty much on like the release day, I think I got Sonic 3. And I got home, put it in immediately, and it was just pretty much the perfect game until Sonic and Knuckles came out to be the complete game. But Sonic 3 was at that time the perfect platforming game to me. Gotcha. It really captured what Sonic was all about. It was like a pretty fast-paced game. There wasn't a lot of levels that really slowed things down too much, so it was pretty constant, fast-paced game. And they, did a great job with the Sonic 1 and Sonic 2 soundtracks. But Sonic 3 is basically a whole different level of proficiency. I think it just captured the environments, to a better level enough that I can see it in my head. If you just say a level, the music starts playing in my head. It's so memorable, and it's awesome. They had so much diversity in like the kind of the backgrounds that the music was inspired from. with that game, and later with Sonic and Knuckles. They each kind of had their own voice, their own characteristics to it, and they could very easily fit in, you know, a live situation. You know, I can hear bands playing this kind of music and being, you know, widely accessible to kind of the general public. And this particular track is just it's kind of like funk rock-y, but also very super melodic.
Hmm.
You know, Hydrocity Zone is, you know, you're start this act basically drowning, escaping a moving wall, and you know, once you get blown out through the, you know, the water, you can finish the level. But you know, you have Sonic running on water, doing, you know, loops, has little hands that come up and holds him and ramps him up to maximum speed. It's just a really cool level all around,
Cool.
graphically and sonically.
All right, so we're going to listen to Hydrocity Zone 2 from Sonic the Hedgehog 3. And this was composed by Sirocco Jones. We'll let that keep playing in the background as we talk about this. I don't know a ton of Sonic music. I owned a Genesis for a very short period of my childhood. Played a little bit of Sonic, of course, loved it, but never really got super into it. But even this one, even this piece, I recognize because you know, VGM fans worldwide love this song, and it for good reason. You know, it's catchy, it's fun, it's active, it's got a lot of different parts. And it's just, you know, Sonic music to me always communicates what I feel Sonic is supposed to communicate, and that's just being cool. Sonic is just cool.
I agree 100%. Sonic, he's got attitude, you know?
He's got attitude.
He brings it to the table every game. Even Sonic R, you know? Not as good as Mario Kart, but it's got a great soundtrack.
And I mean, this Mario Kart is fun, but I don't think of Mario Kart as cool. You know,
exactly.
So, gotta go with Sonic for the cool.
But yeah, I just love how, you know, again, like you have a composer who really kind of gets, you know, the way that the sound engine works on the Genesis. So every you know, piece of instrument that's used really has its own kind of voicing within the song. And they all kind of stand out, so you could kind of flesh out one part or another if you want to like make an arrangement of it, and each piece is strong. So you have really, really awesome percussion in the background of this. It like kind of drives the song constantly the entire time, building it up to kind of towards the end of the loop. It kind of reaches like this more kind of climax portion. It's really neat. It has like kind of, I don't know, it gives me like kind of like some of like Latin vibe that I hear in a lot of other songs that I listen to. And the bass line is really prominent, but it's not overpowering. It's just really well mixed, well arranged. So you could, you know, there's one thing about writing music, but like to get everything to sit really well together sonically is really important. So I think, yeah, terrible pun, not intended. But yeah, the way that, you know, the tones chosen for the instrumentation is just as important in a piece like this as what the actual notation is. And I think that it really plays to the strength of the Genesis FM chip.
Yeah, I love Genesis music that sounds like Sonic music.
Doug, you just missed some Sonic, thanks.
That's okay, you can still hear it playing in the background for at least a little bit. So you sent me some extended versions of songs, which I didn't notice until maybe it was too late.
Yeah, a half hour is too short.
Yeah, so we're not going to listen to the whole track. In fact, you may have
That's
noticed
fine.
it's looped a couple times. Um, yeah, so let's unless you have something else to say about Sonic 3 and how cool it is.
No, just that it's cool and everyone should play it.
It's cool. I keep meaning to get my clip-on sunglasses attachments for my glasses, so I can every time a piece of music is cool, I can just clip them on and be like, "Yo."
Yeah.
Maybe
Yeah,
next
it's
time.
like the show's equivalent of an applause sign.
Please applaud. Please give me your favorite emotes. Please respond. Please give me a 10. All right. Let's fade down Hydrosity Zone here and move on to our next track. What do you got for us next?
All right. So this, I knew I wanted to pick something from this game because the soundtrack is just incredible. So it's almost impossible to pick a single piece of music from it. So I know in past ones people have talked about Chrono Trigger. We have briefly talked about Chrono Trigger and Chrono Cross earlier. So I picked Time's Grassland, which is the homeworld theme of the overworld in Chrono Cross. So this is, another soundtrack done by Itsuru Mitsuda, and he just is like another legendary composer. He did such a phenomenal job with Chrono Trigger, and he kind of upped the bar with the extended range of sample sets that the PlayStation allowed, and had a much bigger soundtrack, and every track is good. I couldn't pick one that's not. The reason I picked this one is because it has a lot of really interesting motifs that kind of throw back to the original game that are snuck in. They're voiced very differently. They're some of the main melodies of other songs from the original game, but what's interesting is they're not really the focus. They're kind of in the background doing subtle accompaniment. And I always thought that was like a really interesting kind of take on reusing some of the themes. It was just like kind of an Easter egg for somebody who was willing enough to pay attention to the soundtrack. And it really kind of captures like the mood of the game. It's not exactly a happy overworld, but it's not sad either. There's kind of like a somewhat kind of like lonely feeling that this piece gives. And if for anybody who's played the game, it really fits that kind of the story. Yeah. Anyway, yeah.
Well,
I could talk more about it later, but yeah.
Yeah. Again, I think this might be another extended one. Maybe not. I don't know. But we'll have plenty of time to talk about it as we listen to it in the background. But for now, here is Home or Time's Grasslands from Chrono Cross, and this was composed by Yasunori Mitsuda. So that was the main theme from Chrono Trigger. Oh, I'm sorry. That was Time's Grasslands from Chrono Cross. Again, composed by Yasunori Mitsuda.
A common mistake.
Yeah, I mean, I was able to catch the Easter egg. It seems like an obvious one, but it's like you mentioned, it's very tastefully done. It's definitely an interesting new take on it. It didn't feel like a rehash of the main theme from Chrono Trigger, but it carries some of the same emotions while also kind of making it a little bit more groovy, I guess. Not groovy as in, I don't know, but groove-y.
Yeah. It definitely has like a kind of a driving percussive vibe throughout the whole song. But again, it's like another example of really well chosen instrumentation to play out the part that was written. One thing that really stands out to me in this, despite loving the guitar and like kind of that main sitar-ish type of lead, I really love the upright bass in this track. It's just really well voiced, for the bass notes in it. It kind of makes the chords ring out in a certain way that without the bass track, it would just be so much different. But every instrument kind of plays its own role in that, and they can all kind of stand on their own. But as a whole, it's a really kind of powerful piece for me because it's just it embodies like kind of the feel of the game perfectly. Yeah, like I said, it's not like happy. It's not necessarily happy, but it's not sad either. It's kind of something in between.
Yeah.
And for anybody who's played the game, it kind of reflects what the character is going throughout it.
Yeah. When this theme is used in the original Chrono Trigger game, I can't help but think, big adventure driving you on, making you feel like, you might not be powerful, but dang it, you're gonna win the day. You're gonna save the world and whatnot. And then to reuse it here, it doesn't feel that big and driving and adventurous as before. It feels much more pensive, much more, and
I believe, to play into that kind of idea, you only very briefly hear this in the beginning, even though you do access the overworlds. The first part of the game, so a very brief, kind of, synopsis of the game is that it kind of explores parallel dimensions with the same characters existing in both dimensions, except for the main character. He does not have a counterpart for reasons that you find out later in the game. And then one of the other primary characters does not have a counterpoint in it. But you only start from your main village and go to one other location to hear this theme in like the first like quarter of the game before you actually rediscover your home dimension. So the game starts out, kind of just a kid, happy-go-lucky. He's just collecting, lizard shells on a beach, and then accidentally stumbles onto an alternate dimension.
Just like my childhood.
I hate when that happens.
Yeah,
I hate when that happens.
It's the worst. Just like adventures, they tend to make one late for dinner.
So the kind of somewhat melancholic feel of this piece to me like really kind of makes sense because you return home from an alternate dimension, kind of similar to in Chrono Trigger. It starts out just like, oh, I'm traveling through time to save a person, and it starts out that very baseline story, but the main characters stumble onto something much bigger than what they originally intended to, and it's not possible to look away from it at that point. You're just kind of so entrenched in it, you have to see it through. And very similarly in Chrono Cross, that's kind of what happens between the main character.
Gotcha. Yeah, and so this was a PlayStation 1 game. Was it ever released or remastered or ported for any other systems, or is it only a PlayStation 1 game?
I think at one point, I think it might have come out in the PlayStation Store, but I am not 100% sure because I had the original game on disc for PlayStation 1 when it came out, and then I have since played it on emulator, but I have not played on any remake. So if somebody else knows, definitely tell us. But
Gotcha.
or a quick Google search, I could find out. But At this moment, I'm actually not sure,
Okay.
but it's worth
Well,
playing. Anybody who hasn't played it, it is an awesome game.
yeah, I'll have to check it out, either via emulation or I don't know, dig up an old PlayStation or PlayStation 2 and find it. Or bother Petulaphobe in the chat. I know he has a PlayStation 2 that can play PlayStation 1 games.
Mm-mm.
So I'll just bully him into letting me play it. Well, all right, we got 2 songs left. What's next?
The next one is from a Dreamcast RPG that came out in 2000. So this was Skies of Arcadia, and the theme for the Little Jack, which is the name of the second airship of the game. So the first one that you, as a main character, actually start flying around. The world in this game is really cool. It would take a little too long to kind of go through the entirety of the track because it's long for a reason.
Mm.
So essentially, the world theme for this game, it's rearranged with different instrumentations and some different, rhythmic choices and very slightly different melodies depending on which region of the world you are in the game with each ship. And this is kind of into the idea I was talking about before with transitional game music. This game exemplified that in a number of ways. So they had parts of the game where during a boss fight, you have a regular boss theme. If your characters are all very weak, it's more sinister. The music changes to a more sinister kind of music. And then, when you kind of have the boss on the ropes, the game music switches to a more triumphant, energetic theme, like you're going to win, you're persevering. And they do the same kind of like transitional music within the home world. Gotcha. So basically, the game there is no ground, essentially. There's just floating islands. So each different region exists under a different moon. So each moon is like a different, like an homage to a different culture that exists. So you have, like the yellow moon is like kind of this uppity, aristocratic type of like a technologically advanced society, and they're for the most part that people are kind of cruel. But then you have the green moon, and it's very like a tribal society. Think like Peruvian type of vibes. That's what the music reflects, is a lot of like Peruvian music, and so on. You have different cultures kind of reflected in the game. Mm-hmm. And the music plays a big part in that too. So each area has something that's inspired with real world cultural music.
Cool. All right. Well, let's take a listen to the Little Jack theme, or the world map theme number 2 from Skies of Arcadia, and this was composed by Yutaka Minobe. very fun, very airy, floaty kind of theme. Very, I mean, I think it's very appropriate for an airship. That was the Little Jack theme from Skies of Arcadia, composed by Yutaka Minobe. Yeah, I really liked this. I thought it was fun.
Yeah, and like I said before, the track I sent you is very long. It's stitched together, so under each different moon, the instrumentation changes for kind of the same song.
Okay. I was wondering why I could only find a 30-minute version of this.
Yeah, but it's really cool. It's like energetic. It's still early in the game, so everything's like relatively happy. Yeah, you think you're just kind of doing some menial air pirate affairs, but
good
again,
old air piracy.
Yeah, they're the happy, the nice people, but they're air pirates for whatever reason.
Well, nice pirates exist in fiction.
Yeah, they're honorable, nice, good-doing pirates. They're really just taking it back and turning it into something positive.
More power to them.
But they're kind of Robin Hood-esque, I think.
Okay.
They're doing it they're looking out for the little guy. But yeah, the game is really cool. It's one of the kind of underlooked games because it came out for the Dreamcast, which not as many people had, and then it had a late remake come out for the GameCube, and it was rebranded as Skies of Arcadia Legends, and I think they added in a little extra content plus a new playable character, which I'll admit I haven't played that version, but I have played the Dreamcast one probably 4 or 5 times.
Gotcha.
It's awesome game. Really unique battle system. All the music is really well done. Really fits the vibe of kind of what they're going for. The sad scenes are extremely sad. the happy, uplifting ones are, the motivational poster of music.
Yeah.
Basically. Very uplifting.
Hang in there with the kitten, holding on to the...
Yeah, pretty much. And the only difference is the kitten is replaced by a lovable, a morphable floating goo ball.
Gotcha.
Named Cupel. who's really cool.
Just as adorable.
Yeah. And it can change into a sword, so what's not to love?
What's not to love? A pet that's adorable, lovable, and functional is just...
Yeah, it really is the complete package. But yeah, it's another game that's like if anybody who plays RPGs, it should be on their list. It's a really highly rated. It has a kind of like a cult following, just because not as many people knew about it, but it does really hang in there with kind of the best RPGs in my opinion. Yeah. It has a really original story. The character development is, pretty much perfect and very relatable. Nobody does things that are very outside their established character traits. People who, go through something sad in a game, sometimes they're just these like one-dimensional characters who, they have the same attitude no matter what's going on, and it's slightly unrealistic. But, somebody who is like very optimistic, like one of the main characters in this game, going through a tragic moment, actually, you see them become very sad and like being depressed, or it's really a well done game and the cinematography of it for cutscenes was very very kind of moving. It captured that emotion of like three-dimensionality that people have very well, and I don't think many games before that really captured it as well as this one does.
It's interesting to hear that it has a unique combat system. I'd love to hear more about that. I love when RPGs do creative things with combat, and it actually the one that I always think of when I talk about RPGs with unique combat systems is Baten Kaitos, which was a GameCube JRPG whose combat system was all card based. So each character you controlled had a deck of cards, and you would select the sword card to attack an enemy, and you would select the bananas card to heal yourself.
That's kind of cool.
That also is an RPG that takes place in different islands floating in the sky with no ground. So,
well, I guess I'll have to go. Yeah, I guess I'll have to go play it now. But yeah, this is you have different shards that exist that represent each of the moons. So depending on what enemies that you're fighting, they each have similar to like most RPGs, you have natural weaknesses and strengths, and by selecting, what weapon modifiers that you're using, they can be more or less effective against certain enemies, but then also play into the effectiveness of things like healing your teammates, and then also, how you can do different combination moves with people. And there's also a second type of battle system. So you have the standard, hey, I'm standing outside on the hull of my ship for some reason fighting a bird. But then you also have what would be more realistic in these scenarios, that you have random encounters with other air pirates or other armadas. So you have a completely different style of fighting. You have a grid-based tactical style where you have X number of turns to go, and each moveset costs a different value for your total grid. So you have to do planning on, basically your stat upgrades. So like greasing the gears would be like casting like haste on yourself, so you accomplish the same task with less of your grid being taken up. You can do things where you'll shoot a torpedo and it will skip a turn, so you can fill something in between, or on the same turn where the torpedo lands, so you get combinations of damage stacking up. It's a really well done system, and the battles can actually take a fairly long time depending on who you're fighting, and you have to really strategize with it because the grids are pretty long. But it's very fun. It was really kind of a unique, different way to have experience like RPG combat. I don't know any other game that really does something like that. I guess the closest would be like something like Final Fantasy Tactics, but even then, that's a completely different style.
Yeah. Well, okay. Do you want to move on to the last theme here?
Yes, and definitely, at least somebody in the chat is a big fan of this one as well.
Well, you got someone here. This is, of all the games here, this is the one that I played the most, and I like this theme the most. So I'm excited to talk about this with you. But why don't you go ahead and introduce it?
Okay, so very similarly to the reason why I chose Solstice as my first one, was because of kind of the roots in progressive music and rock and kind of like metal in-game music. I wouldn't say this is exactly metal, but definitely kind of heavier progressive rock. So this is the Terran theme from StarCraft, which was composed by Glenn Stafford in 1998. Just a really awesome soundtrack. There's I believe like 3 themes for each race in that game, and it just kind of captures like the grittiness of what you might imagine a Terran going out and terraforming other planets and expanding their empire across the stars. It's still like rugged and gritty and industrial sounding. It's just a really cool driving type of music, and it really played into kind of like the pacing of a game like StarCraft, which I played. I don't even know how many hours just throughout the years.
In the triple digits, in the quadruple digits.
Definitely in quadruple digits.
Wow. Yeah. All right.
Hands
well,
down.
This is, as Ben mentioned, this is the first Terran theme from the original StarCraft, and this was composed by Glenn Stafford. as much as I just want to listen to the entire thing, I'm going to fade it down and talk a little bit about this. This was the first Terran theme from the original StarCraft, again, composed by Glenn Stafford. And this is another one. This is a track that loops eventually, but it's a 5-minute long track, and I think it loops after like 4 minutes and 30 seconds or so. I have incredibly fond memories of playing StarCraft 1. I played so much StarCraft 1 as a kid. And I remember specifically with this track, as a kid, I must not have realized that it looped because it's so long and it has so many different parts to it. And then eventually, I grew up enough to realize like, oh, it's got a natural looping point somewhere around the 5-minute mark. That's so cool. And I will say that not only did I not have quadruple digits of hours in this game, although probably solidly triple digits, I also spent most of that time playing the custom maps, the use map settings maps, for things like the turret defenses and the RPGs and the whatnot. But I still heard this theme, and I can proudly say that I did not turn the music down for StarCraft. I loved the whole soundtrack of StarCraft.
Yeah, the only game I've ever come close to like putting in the same amount of hours is Dota, and that is like 3,000 hours. So I believe I have probably more total time in StarCraft just because of how long I played it, like how long it's been available. But yeah, what's interesting to me about like this is I was really into this kind of music before I was into what I knew as progressive music. Because at the time I was just listening to, punk music. So I was like very big into like The Offspring as my favorite band at the time. And this music still like really clicked with me, to a different level. And which is what, eventually when I discovered bands that were like considered progressive rock or progressive metal, they really kind of resonated with me so strongly because I already really kind of listened to that type of music in a lot of like the games that I was playing. A lot of those songs, even from, like Sonic the Hedgehog or in some of these JRPGs, are very, progressive, where they don't necessarily stick to a singular style. They are free to explore anything, like what kind of emotion does this environment have, or what is this character going through at the time, like how do I convey that emotion? And that's like to me what progressive music is really about. And this is a perfect example of that, on a musical level. It explores like kind of the different musical timbres that you might imagine out in the frontier of space. At first, you're just working for a corporation trying to expand the human civilization, but then get kind of tangled up in this web of this intergalactic war between a hive mind and a super advanced alien race.
And other humans
and then you at the same time suffer go through a spacefaring kind of civil war. It's really deep game.
Story kind of fell apart in the last entry of StarCraft 2, but until then, really good.
And the first game actually had a lot of really good novelizations as well.
I read a few
kind of follow Jim Raynor around mostly, but it really cool. For a kind of a tactics, real-time strategy game, actually had a very good story. Really relatable characters.
Not only the novelizations itself, but the stuff they presented in game. The voice acting for all of the like in-game cutscenes. Not really cutscenes, but like the parts where they would take control away from you and they would move the characters around on their own and do that. It was very impressive to me as a kid. I remember having to cheat my way through the campaigns as a kid, but eventually I did go back as an adult, and I did beat the campaigns with no cheating on my honor. That
you do a little bit of that breathe deep, get your Vespene gas off, and
show me the power was a popular one. Just like, I don't want to bother with people dealing damage to me. I just want to be invincible. Operation Seawall. I can't be bothered to wait 30 seconds for the supply depot to build. Are you kidding me?
Yeah, some of those buildings, especially on the Protoss side, were painfully long.
Well, yeah, I mean, everything in Protoss was painfully long, but once it finally got out, it packed a punch.
Yeah, that's true.
What
But
was
yeah,
your main in StarCraft One?
all right. So even though I chose Terran for this theme, as Packet Pupper had said in the chat earlier, I'm a dirty Zerg rusher. So I mained Zerg for probably 2/3 of the amount of time I played StarCraft. So I know how to play each of the races, but Zerg was definitely my bread and butter. It kind of played into like what I like in most games. So in most games I play, I'm very into like fast paced, kind of like action based
Gotcha.
tactics, and I think that Zerg amplify that to a T. So they, you know, your whole point is like get the early advantage, like send out scouts, find your opponent earlier, and start deterring them, and kind of be like a needle in their side while you're expanding. And they're very quick at doing that. So they each race has like kind of like where they have their sweet spot in a game. So depending on your game length, early game Zerg absolutely destroy everything. As long as you are good at the game and know how to play, the scout game very well and know where your opponent is to constantly harass them. Zerg, that is their job. Terran is very middle, like a good middle ground team, and then Protoss endgame units are really dirty. Once you start busting out, High Templar, it's four pool. Yeah, the four pool is important. Really, that's kind of an all-in strategy.
Very much.
Getting that four pool, it's kind of the instant sink or swim. So if you miss your scout on a four pool, you're basically, you've given up the game.
Yeah.
But successfully,
Talk
you're
about
just gonna
early game advantage.
Yeah, you're gonna win a 5-minute game with a successful four pool.
Yeah, I never played. Like I mentioned, I never played too much competitively in StarCraft 1, so I don't ever think I had a StarCraft 1 main race. But when StarCraft 2 came out, when I was in college, for whatever reason, I found Protoss to be the easiest for me to get behind. And maybe it's because at a lower skill level, games tend to go to late game, and so you tend to get the Protoss big high power units. And my strategy could be select army, press A, attack base. I'm good to go. But
that's exactly right. Like Protoss are pretty tough to manage early game because the units take a very long time to spawn, and if you're, like you said, if you're playing the game and you're not very skilled at it or like really have an in-depth knowledge, Protoss really kind of suffer if you're not good at a micro game. So understanding how to control your units individually or how you can subgroup them is very important because you have a lot of resources poured into a single unit. So you want to maximize their effectiveness.
Yeah.
So things like letting their health stay up high and not depreciate their shields is really important. So rotating units around, kind of like mitigating damage among all of your units rather than letting one get taken out after another. It's really important. Exactly. But as you said, like Protoss late game is really, especially to a novice player, is really intimidating. I know
you get
when
like
I was
3 or 4 Colossi, and you just mow down pretty much any army.
Yeah, in StarCraft 1, I remember the first time, playing as a Terran and running against like a carrier fleet, and you just don't know what to do. Yeah. For somebody who didn't know the deeper aspects of the game, that was like, well, if they get that, I lose.
So yeah, I mean, if they have carriers and they have numbers approximating anything close to what you would call a fleet, it's basically over unless you have a battle cruiser fleet or or what have you. And I think there were other ways that they mitigated that in the expansions as well. But yeah, like
just a science vessel would be the ultimate,
counter. Oh yeah, just EMP wave and get rid of half their health.
Right.
Yeah,
that
and just
Goliaths are the best way to deal with them, which you later learn. But when you're first doing it, you kind of have to have a really good scouting in that game to really understand what, not only like what am I going to do with my resources and my bases, but what are they doing, because you have to kind of like think about an appropriate counter. So if you go all into one strategy where they're already building a counter to you, you're wasting your resources essentially, unless you're extremely good at micromanagement.
I think that was, so when I played StarCraft 2 in the original expansion, Wings of Liberty, or the original without expansions, I
Yep.
climbed up to Diamond League, and I want to say the reason I didn't go any further is because I got really bad at that tech switching. Of like, I've built up my army, and I'm kind of focused on one thing, and it's worked pretty well so far. But they're starting to counter it, and I just didn't have time to switch to another thing before they would roll over me. So I had to basically win, not necessarily in like my first attack, but I had to win in my first sort of strategy. And if that
Mm,
one didn't work, then I couldn't really switch to another strategy. But
yeah.
I love StarCraft 2, and I then went back and sort of retroactively became a Protoss main in StarCraft 1 when I
Mm.
went back and played through some of the stuff. But again, I've never sat down on the ladder because the only people who play ladder in StarCraft 1 now are like
Are
Koreans
amazing.
who wipe the
Yeah,
floor with
I
you.
used to. That was actually my first exposure to professional esports. Was I was super into watching professional StarCraft.
Hmm.
The games were just so intense because playing the game at a casual level, you're like, okay, well, this is how it is, and then you're watching pros do it, and it's like that's possible. Like you can do that, and
Yeah,
it's just like not a single wasted movement.
yeah.
Everything had a purpose, and it was just incredible to watch. And that's kind of like why eventually I got into like competitive Dota and stuff like that.
Hmm.
But it all started with StarCraft for me,
Yeah.
and eventually, I did ladders as well. I didn't do the regular StarCraft ladders. I joined a group called iCup afterwards,
Hmm.
um, and it was basically an independent ladder series. And I think it was ranked up to like S or double S, and I ended maybe like a low A or something like
Okay.
that. So not the best StarCraft player, but definitely better than the average
Yeah.
player.
You would definitely hold your own. Yeah, gosh. Did you ever play StarCraft 2? Did you ever get into that?
I was in when they did betas, like closed betas. I had an access code for that, and I did play it for a little while, but it didn't resonate with me as much as the original
Mm.
game. I don't know if it was just I was so ingrained in the first one, and I love the art style. They worked the isometric view perfectly. The way you handle units and subdivide them was really, like it was basically the perfectly balanced game.
Hmm.
And kind of getting used to a brand new one with like different, and it does sound a little trite, but like different art style,
Yeah.
that it was like it wasn't as good to me. I
I mean, it
still
was
prefer.
like it was what, like 10, 11 years in the future, maybe more. I
Yeah.
don't remember when it came out, but a lot changed. I think it's worth it, but I'm also a little bit of rose-tinted glasses. It's not that long in the past, but I'm trying to retroactively justify the thousands of hours I put into StarCraft 2. So,
Mm.
and
No,
plus,
I
I think
mean,
the first one's free at this point.
yes,
So,
it is. It is. It's on the Blizzard .net, or like the BattleNet
yeah,
platform. It is. It's free.
very, very good.
So maybe
Um,
we could get NGSO StarCraft night one of these
and
days.
GSO StarCraft tournaments, or
Yes.
maybe a little bit more more up to my speed or up to the speed of the other people. There's actually a very good co-op mode, like a
Oh, okay.
dedicated co-op mode in StarCraft 2. It's sort of a hybrid between. It's not really a hybrid. It's like the campaign missions,
Mm-mm.
but you just have a second player,
Oh,
and
that's
there's
pretty
a whole
cool.
bunch of stuff there that. But this is not a StarCraft podcast, so
No, but
I'll
it
talk to
very
you about it
easily could be
offline.
with the amount of hours that we've both
Yeah,
logged in.
gosh. But yeah, StarCraft, great game, great soundtracks, great story. Don't play Legacy of the Void, or at least don't play the end of Legacy of the Void. Um, well, all right. Why don't we move on to the final section of the show? Let's
Sure.
do everyone's favorite section, the instrument petting zoo. So this is where Ben gets to show off one or more of the instruments that he is proficient in. And this is an instrument that I also use, so hopefully I'll know a little bit. But I was also told that I would be getting a guitar history lesson and that I should take
Yes.
notes. So everyone, open up Notepad or your preferred text editor and start taking notes. I have been told there is going to be a quiz on this at a later date. But Ben, what are you going to show us today?
Okay, I'm gonna kind of show you. Well, first, what I play in the orchestra primarily is bass.
Aha.
So
Very
this is my
familiar with that.
Yep, and this is my Ibanez BTB 5 string. So this is just tuned to a standard 5 string bass. So low B, E, A, D, G.
Okay.
Uh, I absolutely love this bass. Had it for about 3 years now. Um, it's set up. This is set up like pretty much perfectly at this point. So by perfectly set up, I mean the action to the like the action.
We'll fix it in post.
Yes, the action, which is the string height from the actual fingerboard, is very low without having fret buzz. So it's very easy to, press down. It doesn't take as much energy if you had something like a higher fret, which, sometimes, having higher strings can have benefits on sonic level. You can get potentially more sustain. You have a little bit more play with the string, but it is a little more fatiguing on your hands. So you have to press down harder. So if you're doing just kind of slow stuff, it's not so bad. But if you're doing any faster passages, it's it's actually kind of a little more troubling, and more so with guitar, in my opinion. This I've played a couple times with the orchestra. It's my Luna acoustic.
Very pretty artwork design on the front there.
Yeah, so that's a laser etched henna pattern. It's a very beautiful top.
Yeah.
So this is a spruce guitar. I've recently retrofitted it with acoustic electric pickup. And then the only other thing I need to do the next time I restring, I have some ebony bridge pins with abalone dot. So this is admittedly not like a really super high end guitar. I had found it and it was on sale as like kind of a demo guitar, and I think it was only like about like $300 or $400. But I remember
only $300 to $400. Wow.
Well, in the guitar world, that's really not that expensive, surprisingly.
No, it isn't.
But I was in the acoustic room and I was playing it next to a bunch of like bigger name guitars that everyone might think with quality acoustics like Taylor and Martin, and for whatever reason that guitar actually really genuinely felt better in my hands. The neck profile was more comfortable to me, and the way it sounded was good. But one thing I learned later on is I do as a hobby, I kind of like change components or I fix up guitars. So I have several in my basement that I'm working on at the moment.
Yeah.
But I slowly started changing over components. So because I like the feel of the neck, I want to take advantage of that and just do what I can to make it a more kind of robust instrument. So something as small as like bridge pins, which are going to give it denser material to allow the guitar to ring out better or sustain better, is a useful upgrade, and it's not that expensive, and it's very easy to do yourself. And then you get into things like filing your own guitar neck, which would be like replacing this point where the strings go over the guitar and it creates a break angle. So a lot of your guitar's tone comes from the things like the density of your bridge pins on an acoustic, the actual the bridge saddle down here, which is in this guitar plastic. So plastic is not very good. It's kind of a thin, easy material, so it gets a kind of like hollow, tinny sound to it sometimes. But when you use a denser material, traditionally like bone, or a modern material like Tusk by Graphtec, that kind of denser material gives a more robust, kind of boomy sound, which is pretty cool. So anyway, we'll move on to like what I would consider my primary guitar. So this is my Ibanez 2760 RG. So I've changed out pickups. So pickups are the part of an electric guitar which actually interpret the vibration of the string and transmit it to an electrical signal. And the way that changes is you have different magnets that you can choose, whether you're doing like a ceramic magnet, you can have different types of metal like alnico, so aluminum and nickel. And they have different grades of those, plus different types of windings, like the amount of times like a copper wire can be wrapped around a bobbin. And you can change things like the number of coils, number of winds. You can also change the thickness of the gauge to change the total impedance value that you get from that. And that you can, I mean, I could literally talk for, several hours just about things like, pickup hardware and technology and stuff like that, which I'll briefly talk about it in our guitar history lesson later on.
Sure.
But So I've been playing 7-string guitar for maybe since 2007, 2008. So I basically have not played a 6-string electric guitar since then. I definitely haven't owned one.
Hmm.
The acoustic would be the closest thing. So they only similar to the bass, the lowest note is a B, a low B.
There we go. Get a better angle there. That looks good.
So one thing that I love about electric guitar, particularly, is that guitars are an expressive instrument.
Mhm.
You have a lot of different ways you can voice chords, which admittedly, as long as I've been playing guitar, that's not my strong suit. I'm not a
Mhm.
very good chord player. I've kind of focused more in on lead playing and really understanding tonality and getting, a good understanding of hardware effects and like how the guitar actually works. So what's interesting about an electric guitar opposed to an acoustic is you have a lot of options for the sonics of it, so how the actual guitar sounds. So even within one type of sound, so this for example is a clean sound with a compressor. So basically the compressor is just kind of evening out the level, so low notes and high notes that would typically be at different amplitudes or different levels of output, like bass notes being more boomy than high notes. They all kind of even out, so they're more even sounding. So this would be on the bridge pickup, the bottom
Okay.
one. So typically that's more like a full-bodied type of sound. And with
Could probably use a
select,
little bit more volume out of it. It's tough to hear here.
is that better?
I don't think that changed. I'm wondering if it's only coming through. It seems to only be coming through on your actual mic and not coming through any like effects or anything. Yeah. Now I'm getting nothing.
Oh, that's weird. On regular Discord, it comes through this channel. Um, well, let's see. Well, I can do a little hot swap if you give me 1 second.
Sure. All right. We are. Oh, I'm hearing clicking and popping. Ooh, that sounds like it's going to be loud. Okay. There we go. Now we're hearing it. And now we're going to hot swap back to the microphone real quick so that he can communicate with us. So, yeah, it's a little bit of sample of the guitar and still no sound out of that microphone. But
There we go.
hey, there we are. Yeah, and
Okay.
even in just that little sample, we saw, how many different ways the guitar can sound, and you didn't even, I don't think you fiddled with that much, but I think you changed maybe the pickup that you were using and maybe an effect that you were using or not. Um, so yeah.
Yeah. So what I was doing there was just on the same patch. I didn't change anything on my effects pedal or anything like that. I was just simply changing the pickup, the
Mhm.
selector. So there's 5 positions on this particular guitar. Some
5
guitars,
positions, wow.
yeah. So that's like a Strat style configuration, like a Fender Strat. There are other guitars that some have no pickup selecting. Others, like Gibson Les Pauls, more traditionally have 3 position pickups selectors. So essentially, what that's doing is on the bottom position, it's just this bottom set of pickups. On this guitar, this one, second position, is just going to be this coil. Middle position is the bottom coil of the top pickup and the top coil of the bottom pickup. So
Okay.
those are working together. The top one is just this top rail on this guitar, and this one is the full pickup. So there's lots of other, you can add things on to the electronics of guitars to change them on your own. So you can follow things like wiring diagrams. You can add in what's called a push pull pot, so you can make this like like a two position selector. If you wanted to, you could have a pull out type of knob, and that gives you another 5 independent sets of different switching capabilities if you wanted to. So people who really want like the most versatile instrument possible might do something like that. I do have one guitar I'm currently working on that does utilize that, so it has 10 available positions for how it's interpreting the sound of the strings, which is pretty cool. So just to switch back in 1 second, the main reason I love electric guitar, obviously being a heavy metal person, is the power and the feel of
Mm-hmm.
a heavy, distorted electric guitar. So what I played before is like a very non-offensive, clean sound, but
So
using
what you're saying? We're about to offend some people?
no, I'm not gonna be offensive, but it's definitely gonna be heavy.
All right.
So just a very quick example of just like the kind of sound that pretty much everybody should be familiar with if they've listened to any music that has come out since, the 1960s or 70s.
Yeah. All right. We'll get that switched over and get an interesting new camera angle as well. All right. There we go. So a kind of different sound out of the guitar. Uh, no, definitely love that very heavy, very distorted sound. I mean, I've loved that. I think that might be the reason why I picked up a guitar in the first place. Um, and it's cool that you can get those different sounds out of the guitar.
Yeah, and that's, I mean, just two options on a pretty much infinite palette of sound that you can get out of a guitar.
Yeah, and I
And
know you actually spend a lot of time like fiddling around with your foot pedals and your software and stuff to be able to get just a wide variety of sound.
oh
And
yeah,
so like it's something that you could sink a lot of time and effort into.
and
And
people
just
do a lot more than I do, and
yeah.
a fair amount of time. But there are people that literally live for this or do it for a profession. Is generate finding sounds of famous musicians and kind of like wrapping their head around how they are getting this sound, like what are they doing, what kind of gear are they using, and how do I achieve that.
Hmm.
And that's kind of what I that's like a second uh, kind of hobby of mine as a musician, is more so not just like what notes are people playing, but like how are they achieving that sound, like what are they doing to their gear to produce that kind of tone. Because you could listen to any number of guitar players who are very good and playing, they could play a song note for note, but it's not going to have that same type of feel if you're playing it with, say, the wrong kind of sound. It just doesn't fit the characteristic that maybe the original artist had. Or even on an original song, you might not be playing to the strength of your own piece by just
Hmm.
not having understanding of sonic development on a guitar. And not
Yeah.
to say I'm an expert, but I just have spent a very long time working with different guitar gear and just tone in general.
And not to divert us away from the guitar specifically, but you also do a lot of this for the bass guitar when you're playing in the orchestra, right?
Yes. So yeah, so part of what makes bass both fun and slightly challenging in a symphonic environment is it's not a traditional instrument. In
Hmm.
an orchestra, you'd be using for your bass on a string instrument, both a cello and a contrabass, or an upright bass.
Hmm.
So it has a really fundamentally different type of sound. You have different scale lengths that are going to play into how it sounds. You have, on a upright bass, you have the difference between fretted and non-fretted as well. So that in itself gives a different type of sound. the fact that you have a hollow body that's really projecting out gives a way different type of tonal character that the electric bass really doesn't have. There's some ways that you can emulate it, but it's not going to come too close.
Mhm.
So what I try to do is think about where in the orchestra uh, is the sound not really existing where it could. So I kind of play to the strength of that, or I try to anyway.
Mhm.
So like I try to be a little more punchy in a lot of songs because most orchestral instruments don't really have the capability to do that. So something that's going to be really subsonic or like have a lot of punch and drive, for example, like when we were doing your arrangement of Super Metroid, you could play that on an upright bass, but that game is very dark and gritty and
Mhm.
aggressive, and that is something that you can achieve on an electric bass very easily. So Mike, fortunately for me, wrote a very long, repetitive, non-stop bass line
Hey, I
for that.
didn't I didn't write it. I think it was Kenji
Well,
Yamamoto wrote it, but
yeah, but that was fun. That was not necessarily difficult to play in the sense that the notes were hard, but it was definitely a stamina exercise.
Mhm.
But it was fun. Getting used to playing that both with a pick for a different type of sound and playing nonstop, just full, between two or three fingers is, it was a great exercise. And like I said very early in the interview, that's like kind of what I like about being in the orchestra is I do play bass, but I'm not a bass player. So this really gives me an opportunity to kind of work on my bass chops or just like any kind of proficiency that I might not necessarily practice on my own because I'm too busy playing guitar at home.
Yeah. Well, all right. I know I mentioned earlier that we don't have a time limit, but it is getting a little bit late. So, can I ask for maybe a condensed version or a shortened version of the history of your instrument, just so that
Okay,
we're
well,
not here for another hour?
no problem. Well, if I went through the whole history, we literally have over 3,000 years worth. So I'm not going to go even remotely. I would be a fraction of of that. But yeah, so, a guitar is classified as a chordophone, and that's a type of instrument that basically just has like a resonant body with strings across it. So there's a good number of instruments that really can fall into that category. From even like a harp would be considered something like a chordophone, but as everybody does and should know, a harp and a guitar are very different instruments. And very similarly,
Hold on. I'm not sure. Well, we'll move on.
I'll send you the spark notes.
Okay.
But yeah, so people have you know mu- you know archaeologists have been able to kind of go back to areas of like ancient Mesopotamia, over 3,000 years worth of history in that Mesopotamian basin, and find chordophone type instruments. And has been speculation that there have been instruments even longer ago. There's some evidence even in like Egypt that you had existence of these kind of fretted or stringed instruments that were played. But primarily, the guitar can kind of be dated back to originally to an instrument called the oud, which is still played today. It's traditional in a lot of Arabic music and stuff. Music that you might just like instantly think like that sounds, like Middle Eastern. It has a very specific type of tone. So the oud is a kind of a pear-shaped round back instrument with I believe it has 5 strings on it, and it was played with a pick as well, but the pick was very much different. So where a standard guitar pick now, or a plectrum, is like kind of thin and just fits right in your finger, the shape of the pick for an oud is actually conveniently have a pair of scissors. It's like a bristle of wood or
Hmm.
something hard that you held in your hands like this, and it was much longer than what you would think of as a traditional guitar pick. So there's a long history of the oud existing, and in that area of the world, there wasn't a ton of migration that happened outside what you would consider, modern Middle Eastern territory.
The Fertile
But
Crescent area.
yeah, but eventually, what happened is, there was an expansion westward, and
Mhm.
the the Moors in 17 or in like 700s, so 711, I believe, the Moors invaded the Iberian Peninsula, which is like modern day Spain, and a lot of culture also came with that, as large migrations of people do.
Mhm.
So the people in the Iberian Peninsula really kind of fell in love with the oud and were inspired to kind of eventually make their own types of versions of it. So it inspired a lot of kind of chordophone string instruments. So that really existed for several hundred years. I think up until like the 1600s, there was an instrument called the vihuela, which is it's like predates the Spanish guitar. Um, but eventually, the Spanish guitar was kind of invented, so that got rid of the pear-shaped back. It
Mhm.
flattened kind of the instrument, and it made it like an hourglass shape. So that was around like kind of like the late 1700s, and then it kind of standardized the six-string type of guitar, and it starts at that point to look more similar to what we recognize as the traditional guitar. So a major difference between them and modern guitars is that in the 1800s, um, a guy named Christian Frederick Martin, so the founder of the Martin Guitar Company, developed a new type of internal bracing for an acoustic guitar, which is called an X brace. So essentially, what that did was increase the strength of the guitar. It could hold a lot more tension, which is really important because around that same time in the 1800s, there was the invention and utilization of steel strings.
Mhm.
So prior to all that, you were using mostly like gut string, um, which they sounded nice. They had a nice like mellow sound and a good top end, but the tension was not very high and it didn't project music as loud or as well. So by making a guitar that was more well braced and can handle higher tension, you can now use these much higher tension strings. And in turn, it became a much louder instrument. But even so, it was still not not quite loud enough.
Yeah.
So
Not rock loud, not metal loud.
yeah, so it became it was known, at that point, when it started using steel strings, as more of a chordal instrument, whereas before with something like the Baroque guitar, it was like a solo instrument
Mhm.
that was very melodic. So you had a combination of kind of more modern luthiering, so you were able to produce a lot more guitars cheaper and stronger. So you had many more guitars in circulation, and they were, available to kind of beginner players for the first time, really. So you had a big movement of people, like a lot of people picking up guitar and like learning how to play it. And so yeah, so that lasted like for about 100 years or so, the acoustic flat top, and then eventually there was a guy named Adolf Rickenbacker, so famous for Rickenbacker guitars and basses, and he actually started out really interested in Hawaiian music, which used lap steel instruments, and he was wondering how he could kind of combine the two because lap steel was able to be amplified. So he did like a really long time deep dive into electronics and kind of made the first, well, at least as far as you know, the major historians would say,
Mhm.
the first electric guitar back in 1932, and that was the frying pan guitar. So it was literally just the shape of a frying pan with a very rudimentary coil on it and an electric input, and you were typically playing over like a type of modified radio tube amplifier. So eventually, after that, people started kind of catching on, thinking it was really cool because it was like like originally just a not very loud back of the line instrument that really didn't fit in with the time period main style of music, which was big bands or even like certain types of jazz. It just wasn't
Yeah.
loud enough to really compete with like a brass section. But now that you have the access to have something like an electrically amplified instrument, now all of a sudden you have the uprising of a lot of really prominent electric jazz guitar players. People were able to start playing with bands and be heard as the soloist, like a trumpet
Amazing.
player. Right. And then several years later in 1936, Gibson, Gibson came out with the ES 150, which is an electric hollow body guitar. So ES would be an electric Spanish. 150 was the model number. And that was, very similar to guitars that are still available today. So you can go and find one that looks pretty much the same thing, but with much better electronics and probably better quality control. But
Gotcha.
yeah, it became very prominent in the early 30s. One thing that led to the release of the solid body guitar, or the research to create a solid body guitar, is the combination of having not a very good understanding of the electric pickup plus a hollow body. There tended to be a lot of feedback problems, a lot of interference. You have to remember, back then you didn't really have like things like plastic or a lot of really good insulators. That time, electricity wasn't really super well understood, so they were just working with what they had. Instead of kind of going more the electric route to mitigate some of that, they wanted to make a solid body to stop those, secondary vibrations and air currents to come into the body of the guitar. So Les Paul in 1952 famously came out with the original Les Paul body shape, which is still standard today. It very, very little
I
history.
have one just on the other side of the monitors over there. So yeah,
Well, yeah, see, Mike, our host can participate and
it's
grab
far
it.
too far away. I
Okay,
can't pick it
our
up.
host can't participate, but
No,
everybody,
I'm not being interviewed.
okay, everybody
My
here
turn will
has
come.
Google. They can look at what Les Paul looks like. But anybody who has ever watched anybody play guitar has very likely seen, a standard Les Paul. Hundreds of thousands of guitar players have played these. Many many famous people. You know, like even someone like Jimmy Page has played Gibson, even though he's played Strats in the past as well, but he's pretty famous for playing Les Pauls. Um, but yeah, it's that kind of started a big wave. So as long as it took us to get there in the short time between 1952 to now, there have been thousands of more quality of life upgrades to guitars, from just improved body shapes, better understanding of electronics, better materials, better processing of even like the wood, just so you can minimize things like warping, moisture absorption, things like that. And people are still coming out with new stuff today. I mean, there's the NAMM Festival, the National Association of Music Merchants, every year for these types of people in the industry to go over all the different types of new gear that comes out every year and how they can, better voice or give different options to musicians for guitar. And just as we have this little niche of talking video game music that exists in spades in the guitar world.
Yeah,
There's
absolutely.
so many people or personalities that talk gear online, in every different style of music, and people who live for this kind of thing. And it's really cool to be able to live in a time where it's so easily accessible.
We live in a society that has cool guitar stuff.
Yeah, what more could you ask for? That's all I need.
Gotcha. All right. Well, let's move on to the last question of the evening. We just heard the condensed version of the history of the guitar, which
Yeah.
is all very interesting. Why did you choose to pick up the guitar when you did?
Well, I had first started out playing trumpet for
Okay.
a while, and I was pretty good at it, but basically, I was not really as motivated because I just had a really bad band director eventually. So my first teacher was very good and it made me want to play, but I didn't really want to play for a bad band director at the point, where I kind of decided to stop. So I went a little while without playing any instrument. And one time I was at one of my friends who I had mentioned earlier, kind of got me into Chrono Trigger.
Hmm.
And, surprisingly enough, the reason I even play guitar is because of video game music. So he had his guitar, he had a Les Paul right next to his bed, and we were there playing a game, and he happened to be in the fight in that game against Magus, which
Okay.
is, for a while you think kind of one of the antagonists of the game. So he has like a kind of sinister type of boss theme, and it was so cool. And I remember looking at his guitar and asking if I could try his guitar, and without ever having experience, I kind of just like played a couple of the notes and figured out what the relation between each of the strings was and what each of the notes
Mhm.
was. And just by ear started picking out the Magus boss
Why
battle.
does that not surprise me at all? That's
So
literally the first time you pick up an instrument, you're like, "Yeah, I think I could figure this out."
yeah, so I mean, I did a lot of ear training when I played trumpet, so that's
Mhm.
kind of the approach I took with guitar. So yeah, the first thing that really got me into guitar was literally video game music. It was a very heavy metal interpretable, piece of that soundtrack.
Yeah. And the
And
Magus battle, we didn't listen to it tonight, but I mean,
oh,
what a
it's awesome.
what a killer piece of music. It's
Yeah,
really
there's some
cool.
very good. I mean, just that in the game, it's great. There's some
Mhm.
really amazing arrangements of it online in any kind of style, but especially in heavy metal. So that really kind of jump started me into playing guitar was Chrono Trigger.
Well, Chrono Trigger, the source of many good things.
Yeah,
A good game, good music, and a good musician brought to us. Brought it.
appreciate it.
Whatever. All right. Well, this is by far the longest episode we've done. I mean, to be fair, out of a total of three. But I think it is time that we wrap it up here.
Yeah, I agree.
So Ben, any final words, any final comments?
No, just check out norwalkgso.org for some more information. Mike is going to be kind of doing these for the foreseeable future. We're going to try to be getting content out to you guys while we're not able to perform due to the global pandemic. So it's definitely fun to engage with people. So I encourage more people to just like explore the orchestra and maybe get ready to play some music whenever we are allowed to.
Yeah. So, like Ben mentioned, go to norwalkgso.org. Website is down there in the corner for more information about the orchestra. I'm sure you can find links to our past performances that are up on YouTube and SoundCloud. You can find the other episodes of this Choose Your Character series. I have interviewed Mary and Sam so far, and I've got more people lined up. We'll be back in more or less 2 weeks with whoever our next person is, and it's going to be very exciting. Um, but yeah, until then, I'm Mike. This has been Ben, and we're gonna sign off. Have a great night, everyone.
Take it easy, everybody. Thanks, Mike.